Good afternoon. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at J Moore Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a frustrated baker. Those of you joining us live, drop your questions and comments into the comment box, and you will see me check throughout the show to address whatever your inquiries might be. Today's guest is Ramin Ganeshram, an award-winning journalist, historian, chef, griot, and the executive director of the Westport Museum of History and Culture in Westport, Connecticut. Her area of study is enslaved and mixed-race people in colonial and early federal American history. She's the author of a novel about George Washington's chef, Hercules Posey. The book, The General's Cook. She has written about food culture and historic foodways for the New York Times, New York Newsday, The Washington Post, BBC Travel, National Geographic, Traveler, Epicurious, and others. Let's bring in Ramin.
Hello, how are you, Dara? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled, as we were saying a little bit beforehand. I'm always in awe of my guests, and you are no exception. I always like to kick off what's on your plate today other than doing this show?
Wow. Well, as you said, I'm the executive director of a history museum in Westport, Connecticut. So there's always a lot going on there. A lot of people don't realize that museum exhibitions are planned 2, 3 years out. So
Really?
so we just installed an exhibition, working on the next one. So there's a lot of that. I just sold, very fortunate to sell another book, actually about Hercules. This one is a narrative biography. Yes, that's right.
I
So
ha-
yeah, so starting to do that, and actually, I'm wrapping up a book about Caribbean um, foodways history. That's due in June. So a lot. There's a lot on my plate.
right. Well, congratulations. Publishers Marketplace said the deal was closed. The book is called Stirring Liberty. Is that what the title will be? And it's more about, let's see, how did they put this? How George Washington's enslaved chef transformed American cuisine and secretly cooked his way to freedom.
Yeah.
And I guess this is more of a continuation on Hercule Posey.
Yes. So The General's Cook was a novel about Hercules. And at the time that I wrote it from all the kind of collected research that there was. And that includes a lot of material that I had found, a lot of material that had been found by actually an amazing historian at Mount Vernon called Mary Thompson, who's now historian emerita there. And so I wrote the book as a novel, The General's Cook, because as much as we both found, which was quite a lot for an enslaved person, it wasn't enough for a biography. It really wasn't. So while that book is very much has a good bit of truth, probably 75%, it had to be fictionalized to fill in the gaps. But I never stopped researching him, and I have more material that I have found in the transpo in the years following, including the fact that he used the surname Posey after he probably actually there's some evidence that he did while he was with Washington now, and so now I have enough to write a true biography and share some new research that I've been working on these past 4 years, 5 years.
And I'm sorry, I watched too much Agatha Christie and Hercule Poirot.
Yes,
So I'm not saying Hercules, I'm a Hercule.
that's okay.
But um, I didn't think of saying Hercules. Uh, you went to, I always do a lot of background because I find that fascinating. So you went to a specialty high school, which was more mathematics and science.
Yeah.
Then you got your BA in political science and English. Graduate school, your master's in journalism. and you went to ICE, which is a culinary school
Yeah.
in New York. Tell me, I guess my curiosity was the science and the math high school. Why that? How did this transition?
Hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question. So I went to Stuyvesant High School. Some of your viewers might know it's really people from New York City. I'm born and raised in New York City. Um, and really, so it is a science and math high school, but I have to say that it is a high school where the quality of education across the board, across subjects, is it's very high level and always has been. Um, in those days, I imagine now too, if you went to New York City public schools and you were kind of in advanced classes, the thing you did was took the test for the specialized high schools, which was Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech. Um, and so I was in these advanced classes and I took the test. And it was kind of a situation where if you were lucky enough to get into this elite school, you went. And of course, you were good at math and science, but you didn't necessarily have to follow that path, right? So I have to tell you that even today, 30 plus years after I graduated, I will draw upon information that I got at Stuyvesant. It's amazing the things that I remember from that education. Um, so yeah, so I mean, can I do math and science? Yes, I can, but it wasn't my passion. But I was lucky that we had, for example, Frank McCourt, the Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, was
Okay,
one of the teachers at Stuyvesant when I was there. He was an English teacher. So just to give you the idea of the kind of quality in
okay,
the liberal arts.
right. So let me explain to the guest who might not know. Um, you're very much involved with mixed race people in the colonial era, but you are mixed race. Your
Mhm.
father's from Trinidad, your
Mhm,
mother's from Iran.
mhm.
How did they meet?
Everybody asks me this, and everybody wants it to be this like a romantic or crazy story. Like one was visiting the other's country, or maybe they were on a cruise,
Right,
or maybe they were in
right.
the Corps. They met at a backyard barbecue, a cookout in Brooklyn, as one does if you're from New York. And my mother was a nurse and the director of nursing at the hospital she worked in, which was St. Luke's Medical Center in on the Upper West Side in Morningside Heights. That director of nursing's son was at Brooklyn College with my father. And so everybody was just invited to this cookout, and that's how they met. Yeah.
Your father ended up being a teacher in the States, didn't he?
Yes, he was a Spanish teacher in New York City public schools, junior high school level. Yeah.
All right. So we have high school, college, Columbia for your master's. Where did culinary school fit in? When did you decide I want to be a chef? What was that impetus or that inspiration to go take that course?
Yeah, so when I was, I was working in my career as a journalist. I was a news reporter. I was a magazine editor for business tech magazines, but I always wanted to write about food. And so we're talking about 25, 30 years ago, before
Mhm.
food writing and food media was really a thing. And in fact, having gone to Columbia Journalism School, right, um, it really wasn't considered in those days. Serious women reporters didn't want to write recipes, right? They didn't want to write in the home and the lifestyle living sections because that's where
Right,
we have been forced to be, right? And
right.
so, but for me, I wanted to write about food because I understood from my parents that it was a way to hold on to culture. That, I still grew up in an era where you were forced to assimilate, right? Outside of the house, you were very much encouraged to leave your culture behind. But inside the house, it was the food that kept everything together. And so I say that to say I always wanted to write about food. I always wanted to. And I was discouraged from doing so. But little by little, I was doing it. I was writing for whoever would let me. It was kind of like, you want to do that? Okay, go ahead and do it, right? Um, and then it started to become more respected. And I realized that in order to speak to people who made a life in food, chefs and food producers and farmers, I really needed to have a greater depth of understanding than I did as a serious home cook. And so that's why I went to culinary school. I wanted to really understand it in such great detail that I could speak to anybody about it. No one would have to pause and explain things to me or, dumb it down. I wanted people to feel comfortable enough that they could just talk and get and be and feel like, okay, she understands. She's a chef. She knows what's going on here. And that's what happened actually. In those early days, I'd say that there was literally a handful of trained journalists who were trained chefs. The great Molly O'Neill was one of them, and there were very few others.
Well, you worked with Molly on her big book.
Yeah, One Big Table. Yep, I did. Yeah.
Fill people in on that a little bit.
This was a book, again, very much ahead of its time, that Molly had conceived of, that you could tell the story of America through historic foodways and through culture and what people were doing then and now. It's, I think, in the end, the book was 700, 800 pages long, huge book. Um, and it kind of, what we did was we interviewed thousands of people to see if find those recipes that were really indicative of a place or a time or a community. And I worked. It was a volunteer project on my part, because I had great respect for her, helping coordinate writers who were interviewing people, finding people to interview. I wrote the fish chapter, the whole fish chapter of the book I wrote. And parts of other chapters. And it was really quite a remarkable undertaking. It took a very long time. And I think that was kind of, in the end, it didn't get sort of the shine it should have because it was much anticipated. And it rightfully took a really long time to produce.
I think what I read was about 10 years of her putting it together. She did the the one book that she did because she used to work for the New York Times, and then she was the New York City Cookbook. I
Yeah.
had that on my shelf,
Yeah.
and that was fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
you were reading the stories about the people, which
Yeah.
makes it that much more interesting.
Yeah.
Um, let's get to what's happened recently that I think on, what was it, February 22nd, on George Washington's birthday at Mount Vernon.
Mm.
Tell us about the dinner that you were involved with.
Yeah. So there's a group that I think, um, some of your viewers will probably know, or a company called American Heritage Chocolate, and this is a division of M&M Mars Wrigley. Anyone who goes to historic sites, they probably have seen this American Heritage Chocolate. It is an approximation of the colonial era drinking chocolate, right? Chocolate wasn't eaten as a candy; it was drunk as a very heavy, thick beverage. And they're amazing because they have a conference yearly where, what they do is they bring in historians and museum site directors, and they talk about, not just chocolate history, but how do you approach difficult history. And they do a lot of funding, of exploration of history, mostly through chocolate, right, through food as this access point. And they have a conference yearly. And so this year the conference was at Mount Vernon, and they asked me to be the guest chef. And so what I did was I produced, with a catering team, a 5-course meal, starting from past appetizers all the way to the desserts, of dishes that represented Hercules Posey's life, as an enslaved person, as a Washington's cook at Mount Vernon, as Washington's cook at the president's house in Philadelphia, things that he would have eaten, things that he would have cooked and prepared. And every single item on that menu were things that we knew were, I did the research and I knew were in the account books at Mount Vernon, were either grown at Mount Vernon. We knew from account books that were imported by Washington. There was nothing on that menu that wasn't something both Hercules and George Washington wouldn't have understood and known. So that took quite a bit of research. And then, of course, recreating these dishes using period recipes and so on, um, modernizing them so that they were for modern taste, but also the presentation, right? So the presentation was very modern because what Hercules was doing for Washington was the height of fashion in that time, right? It was the best plating, it was the best presentation for that time. And so we do
Right.
that for our time.
Well, from everything that I could research, not that I match your 15 years on Hercules, that he was a stickler.
Yep.
Be on time, be there, get it done, don't waste my time. His background is fascinating from everything that I'm reading, and I'm going to recommend everybody to get The General's Cook, and we'll hopefully come back to Ramin when Stirring Liberty hits the shelves, and we can help promote that. One of the things that caught my eye that when George Washington's White House was in Philadelphia, that Pennsylvania had passed a law about slaves that if you were a resident of 6 months or more, you got your freedom.
Right.
And from what I can gather, Washington would take his slaves. They never were there 6 months. He would rotate them.
Right. So that was the Pennsylvania Gradual Abolition Law of 1780. I just want to kind of contextualize this for you. 1780, the Revolutionary War was still underway, and Pennsylvania was one of the states that abolished or gradually abolished enslavement, right? It was the first actual gradual abolition law passed in the new United States. And what it said was that if you were an enslaved person, you were in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 6 months, you were free, right? And so there was, it was a little bit more complex than that. If you were under 25, what it meant is that, by the time you reached the age of majority, you would become free. So it affected young people as well. And Washington had off and on during the time of his presidency 9 enslaved people in Philadelphia at the president's house. And so he worked actually with the Attorney General of the United States to figure out how to subvert the state law of Pennsylvania. And what they came up with was if you could rotate these folks, bring them out of the state, didn't even have to be back to Virginia. It could be across the Delaware River to New Jersey, which was a slave state. If you could bring them into a slave state, it would reset the time of the 6 months. And so, but Hercules actually did overstay at one point, so technically was free. He didn't pursue it until later, but he was technically free.
Well, he escaped, didn't he, during an event?
From Mount Vernon. So Washington in the summer of 1796, he often went back home for the summer or part of the summer, and they brought the whole household with him. And so Hercules was there with him in Mount Vernon, and Hercules' son Richmond was accused of stealing money from the saddlebag of a paid white servant. Washington was convinced that this was because the son Richmond and Hercules were planning to self-emancipate. And he then caused Hercules to remain when the household went back to Philadelphia, basically to keep him in Virginia for safekeeping. It would be easier to self-emancipate from Philadelphia, which because of gradual abolition, because there was a vibrant free Black community, because the Pennsylvania Abolition Society was very active, right? So essentially on Washington's birthday in 1797, so now we're talking about 5 months later, right? Washington is in Philadelphia celebrating his last birthday as president. It's his 65th birthday. It's a big deal. And at Mount Vernon, the enslaved community is given some rum and some food to toast and celebrate General Washington's birthday as well. And it was some point during that night that Hercules essentially left the plantation.
It's, I sit there and I've only just scratched the surface and I'm going, In reality, in high school, did I pay attention to history? Could I tell you any of the dates? I could care less. But as I mature and I sit there and I find the basis for how things are accepted today and what came beforehand, quite fascinating. Now, you're doing quite a bit at the Westport Museum. You've gotten some honors there as well. Can you fill us in?
Yes, thank you for asking about that. So, Westport Museum for History and Culture, formerly Westport Historical Society, I came here about 6.5 years ago, and the board had gone through a strategic planning to modernize the institution, to make the history inclusive, to really rest on the rigor of research, to talk about difficult history.
Right.
And so that's what we've been doing here. Our motto is making history whole. And so, what that means for us is that we embed all the actors of history into every story that we tell. It's not, American history, then Black history. It's not American history and then immigrant history. It's not American history and women's history. It's all together all the time. And when it isn't together, or those people aren't represented in the historic record, we talk about why that is. It's not always that they weren't present, but that they weren't accounted for. And so it's funny for us because people often say, "What are you going to do for Black History Month?" or "What are you going to do for, Women's History Month?" And the truth of the matter is, we don't do anything special because we do it every single day in every exhibition, every program. And again, for us, it's really about the fact that unless you understand history, you just said it, right? You can't
Right.
understand what's going on today. Why are we living the way we are today? So we really are very dedicated to this mission of making history whole. It's not always easy. There's a lot of people who don't love that about us, but we don't have a choice. That's what good history is,
Well, controversy is not anything new for you.
right?
I think you incurred that with the George Washington's birthday cookbook.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the ICP Cookbook of the Year, Future Chefs. Can you tell us a bit? That was the winner. To let everybody know, ICP, International Association of Culinary Professionals.
Hmm.
You won Cookbook of the Year. Tell us about that book, Future Chefs.
So that book was based on research that I had been doing. There's a period of time, about 7 years, that I worked as a strategist, a futurist for a market research company, the chief food strategist for their food and beverage division. And one of the things that I had been tracking as a trend was this growing trend of kids cooking, and really being very serious and interested cooks, not just kind of child food, but adult food. And this is before Master Chef Junior and all of these
Right.
different things, right? And I had even written a novel, a middle grade novel around this premise, a young girl who wanted to be like the first kid chef on Food Network before there were kid chefs on Food Network, right? So Future Chefs was based on the research, the trend of research that I had seen. And I realized there's a lot of kids out there who really are very, very skilled cooks. And I just kind of found people all over the country, kids from all over the country, all different walks of life, all different ethnicities, and asked them to share their recipes and their stories. And some of them are quite remarkable. Some of those kids today are working as professional chefs. One, in fact, works as a historic interpretation cook, a historic foodways chef, which is very cool. And so that book, yes, won Cookbook of the Year from ISCP in the family, I think it was a family category. I don't quite remember
Right.
yet.
Just to tell everybody, you can put in Ramin Ganeshram's uh, information. A lot of what we have here is in the comment box. You can click on that, but go to Amazon.com, put in her name, and you will see all the cookbooks and books that she's written, which are all quite amazing. I want to get back to your family roots
Hmm.
because there is food stories to be told there.
Hmm.
And some of the recipes can be found at Epicurious. New York Times did the George Washington in some of those recipes. you had a New York Times story about black cake. And what is black cake?
So black cake is a fruit cake that is very common in the Caribbean. It's most often served at Christmas. A lot of people wrongly think that it is a version of plum pudding. It's not. It has the same ingredients, right? Dried fruit, liquor, and so on. But a plum pudding is a boiled or a steamed confection, and a cake is very different, right? So
Right.
what it really is a version of Irish or English Christmas cake. And sometimes it's called great cake. And it was very common in the UK, in Ireland, in the Caribbean, and even in North America up until probably the mid 19th century. So, what it is a cake that we soak dried fruits in, a rum, for many, many weeks, if not a year. And then a cake is made out of this that is then blackened with something called burnt sugar syrup to make the cake look very dark. And then we add more rum and or different spirits on it. It's an incredibly important and popular, as I said, Christmas holiday wedding cake in the Caribbean. And what's interesting about this cake is although now there are bakeries, professional bakeries, yes, that sell it 100%, but the
Right.
tradition is there are women or people in the community who make the cake. And that's still true in the Caribbean too. It's still considered that the best cakes are made by these women who have what we call, for example, in Trinidad, sweet hand. Right, their hands are sweet for they know how to cook. Right,
Right.
it's a tricky cake to make. It's very difficult. The ingredients are very expensive, and so to mess it up is a costly and disappointing sort of affair. So
You said Sweet Hands.
yeah,
In describing that, you have a cookbook called Sweet Hands
yeah,
Island Cooking from Trinidad and Tobago.
yeah.
And that's been reissued a couple times. That is continually out there on the shelves. Um, Actually, a friend of mine is from Trinidad. Um, and before I moved, my next door neighbor. So we're always going out and doing food and cooking together, and it's great fun. And that's what I'm going to suggest. You know, the food doesn't have to turn out letter perfect, but if you get in the kitchen with people,
Right.
it's a memory. It's a sense memory of friendship and food. So do that. Well, we're coming up to sort of time. I want to go over those final questions I forewarned you about. Not
Sure.
that they're earth shattering, but it
Sure.
makes it fun. If you wake up tomorrow, Ramin, with a new talent, what would it be?
Oh, I would love to be able to paint. I'm always trying to paint and I'm terrible at it. And I would love to be able to paint a picture that really is like, wow. So I'd love that's what it would be.
Well, don't give up. People already know I'm back in. I'm taking watercolor classes, and
Oh,
I keep saying every night, sit down, do something. Just,
yeah,
so maybe once a week I'm trying something. It's not going to be gorgeous,
I love it.
but just, thank God for we were talking about technology and all the reels. I see
Yeah.
things, I go, thank you.
Yeah.
Why did I spend my money taking classes when I could have just watched
Me
these?
too. Yes, I do the same. Yeah. But I'd love to
Okay.
be better at it.
All right. If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
It's interesting this question because I have an 18-year-old daughter, and I feel that a lot of times I'm telling her, in fact, what I would tell myself. And it is this that the timelines that people impose upon you, impose upon our society, are false. They're not real, right? That even though we live in a system for practical reasons where you go through school, K through 12, and then presumably you go to college for 4 years and what have you, that's not the route for everybody. And not to stress so much that you're not getting where you think you should be in the time that you think you should be there, because it doesn't work that way. I wish I knew that because I'd have saved myself a lot of heartache and sort of beating myself up about not getting to things fast enough.
Good advice. What was your ultimate culinary fail, assuming that there was only one?
What was it? I have to say that in the beginning of trying to teach myself to make black cake, because it was one of the things my father didn't make. He actually received cakes from Trinidad as gifts, right? And at the holiday time. So he didn't, I never watched anyone make it. And so I had to teach myself to make this cake 25 years ago. And there were some horrible bombs um, over and over until I figured it out.
That's not a bad one. That's not a bad one.
Also not good at making roti, which is a very Trinidadian thing. I'm really I actually kind of suck at it. I don't know why. I do everything right. Other people use my recipe and they do great jobs with it. Not me.
But the roti is the bread, right?
Yeah, the flat
Right.
bread. Yeah.
Okay. So is it the matter of having cast iron or a hotter pan or
I have all the equipment. I have literally people will use my recipe and make a beautiful roti. I think, who knows? Like maybe I overneat it. I don't know what I do, but it's a joke in my family that like it's always bad.
and I'll just let people know that your father was really the cook in the family. Your mother, being Iranian, really didn't care much about it. So your dad,
She was a good cook, but she didn't care about it. Like she was like, she would do it, but he loved doing it. He loved cooking.
let's see, wake up tomorrow with a new talent, 18-year-old self, culinary fail. What's the best bite you've had all week?
So my daughter is actually becoming a really good cook. And the best thing I had this week was I came home and she was making fettuccine from scratch. And it was really good. And she made a lemon Alfredo sauce to go on it with grilled chicken. It was amazing.
Sounds good. I could go for that right now. And Ramin, what didn't I ask you that I probably should have?
I mean, I you really asked some great questions. I think that, the one thing that I would say is that not, you have asked this in different ways, but I would really like to reiterate to people that um, historic foodways is really often a way to get to some difficult histories and be able to discuss things that are not easily discussed, right?
Right.
Um, and these tools to allow us to get into a topic, for me, that tool is food and foodways, but for someone else, it might be art, it might be music. Um, but I think we need to do more of this so that we can really talk about the things that kind of ail our nation in many ways, so that we can get something close to healing.
Okay. See there, I just froze. It always, without fail. I don't know, but at least it's not as bad as what it was like 5 weeks ago.
Well, that's good.
I want to thank you and remind everybody that Ramin Ganeshram, her Instagram is Nibbles Scribbles New York NYC. So follow her on Instagram. You can find her on Facebook under her name, and the westporthistory.org for the organization. And there's a link for her cookbook here for the General's Cook. And we'll be looking forward to seeing Stirring Liberty.
Thank
I
you.
guess that's about a year and a half out or
Yeah,
close to.
it'll be 2026. Yeah, about a year and a half or so. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll leave a space for you. You'll come back. We'll
Thank
talk about
you.
it.
Well, thank you. That's so kind. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for enlightening us. At least when I walk away from these interviews, I'm a little bit smarter. Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
I,
much. I
all
appreciate it.
right. Okay, everyone. I have next week's guest will be Keisha Ogaldez, chef and entrepreneur. She is a graduate of Natural Gourmet Institute of Culinary Arts that focuses in on organic, vegetarian, vegan, and other health supportive diets. She is a former competitor on Chopped TV show on the Food Network, and she has created her own gourmet nut brand called Live Loud Foods. So definitely tune in. And Celebrating holidays, which brings family and friends together at the table, sharing history, stories, and food. These are memories that last a lifetime. We have Passover coming up. So, for those of you who celebrated a Zizan Pesach or Happy Passover to those of you. We will be here next week, so do tune in. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at food@jmoreliving.com. My Instagram is at Dara Cooks, or on Facebook, type in the Food Enthusiast and you will find my page. Give the page a follow. All shows are immediately archived in video form on J More Living's Facebook page and jmoreliving.com. We truly appreciate when you share our show with friends and family. May your plates always, always remain full. Thank you, and I hope to see you next Thursday.